So my question for you this morning is this. Are you a worrier? And if so, what do you worry about? Anybody? What do you worry about? Lack of funds. Okay, lack of funds. What else do you worry about? That's not it. Kids, grandkids. What do you worry about with your kids and grandkids? Safety? Future? Negative influences, making wise choices, staying close to God. What else do we worry about? The country, the world, the state of things. Helping kids that worry. Okay. Okay, helping kids deal with anxiety. Anything else? So you are a bunch of worriers. I mean, right? I grew up in a household, and I've told this story before, where my mother is a worrier to the extreme. And I always found it fascinating that she worried so much, because when we moved into that house in 1974, on the kitchen door that goes out into the garage. Now, my parents' garage is not a garage. It is a office and a laundry room and a sewing room, but it's what would have been the garage, and they kept the design. You go down 3 steps into it and then out the door. It's not a garage door, it's just a entry door. And so between the kitchen and the garage, there's a doorway that has 3 glass windows in the door. And on the bottom window, kind of right at eye level, my mother put, in 1974 when we moved there, and it is still there today, a bumper sticker. And the bumper sticker has a frown face and a smiley face on either end. And in the middle, it says, "Why worry? Tell it to Jesus." And I always found that comical because, like I said, she's a worrier to the 100th degree. She's probably worrying about something right now, and she's probably in church, and I have no idea what it is she's worrying about, but she's worrying about something because that's just who she is. And if she were here, I would say that, and she would agree. She would vocally agree with me that she's a worrier. She knows that. And so somewhere along my growing up, I got to chuckling at this so much that I developed a phrase. Whenever Mom would be in the kitchen or in the living room or somewhere in the house, and she'd be worrying about something. And when she worries out loud. It's not an internal worry. It's oh my, I don't know what we're going to do if. And I would always say to her, "Mom, it sounds like you need to go out and read your bumper sticker." Every time she worries out loud, that's what I said to her. And I still say it to her from time to time now. And, why worry? Tell it to Jesus. It's a wonderful piece of advice. If only it were that easy, right? To stop and look at a bumper sticker and have that redirect you from worrying. Now, in concept, it's easy, but in reality, it's hard. Yet it's the concept that I think Jesus is pushing us toward in this parable and teaching that follows the parable. Now, you know that all summer we've been looking at parables that Jesus teaches, and parables that Jesus teach are parables, stories that have a point. They're to teach us something. And so Jesus launches into this parable that we're exploring this morning when a bystander, he's in a crowd, and someone in the crowd says to him, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother to give me my share of our father's estate." Well, that's an interesting thing to holler out at a teacher. I mean, obviously this guy was worried about it, right? And so when he says that, Jesus responds in a rather interesting way, I think. Picking up in verse 14, he says, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" And then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." That's how Jesus responded to this guy who's asking him to settle the dispute about the father's estate. And then he goes on, and Luke says, then he told them a story. And this is a story, he said. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." And then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend," you ever talk to yourself? This guy did. "My friend," he says, "you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. Now we read that, we hear that, and you think I'm going to talk about money, right? You think I'm going to talk about greed. You think I'm going to talk about stuff. Well, I'm not necessarily, because I don't think that's really what Jesus was getting at with that. Yes, you can use it to talk about stuff and greed and storing up for yourselves, but I don't think Jesus was necessarily talking about that. And the reason I say that is that in Luke's gospel, right after this story, he transitions and says, "Then turning to his disciples, Jesus said," and he launches into this long teaching. And I think he takes the parable in a very different direction than we normally take the parable if we just cut it out and let it stand on its own. Then he turned to his disciples, and Jesus said, "That is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to eat or enough clothes to wear. For life is more than food, and your body more than clothing. Look at the ravens." Go Ravens, right? Look at the ravens. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, and God cares for them. See, they're God's favorite team. I know. I know. I put it on the sign last year in football season, or the last time they got into the playoffs. God doesn't have favorites, but the sign guy does. Go Ravens. That's what I put out there on the sign. Any of you all who are other team fans. Anyhow, I'm digressing and I don't want to do that. Look at the ravens. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for God feeds them, and you are far more valuable to Him than any birds. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? Can they? No. In fact, they take away from your life if you let them. And if worry can't accomplish a little thing like that, what's the use of worrying over bigger things? Look at the lilies and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon, in all of his glory, was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for flowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, He will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? And don't be concerned about what to eat or what to drink. Don't worry about such things. These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers all over the world, but your Father already knows your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and He will give you everything you need. So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. See, there's the other place where we think this parable has to do with our possessions and money, and greed. This will store up treasures for you in heaven, and the purses of heaven never get old or develop holes. Your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it, and no moth can destroy it. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. So while it's true that Jesus doesn't want us to be greedy, and it's also true that he doesn't want us to hoard or be stingy or love earthly things, the deeper issue here that he is addressing, I think, is a shift in focus. I think he's calling us to shift our focus from me or us to God. And when we are able to do that, we can move from worry to trust. Because I think that's what goes on. When you move from worrying about things to trusting God for everything, you've been able to shift your focus. You're no longer worried or focused on the things that concern you. And you're able to trust God for everything. Shifting focus, moving from worry to trust, applies in terms of how we store up for ourselves. Hoarding, storing up for me, worrying about what we have or don't have, it's all about me. It's all about you. In the parable that Jesus tells, the issue isn't that the farmer has bounty. The issue is the farmer's focus. And Jesus doesn't say that the farmer gets this bounty because he's crooked, or he's unjust, or he uses evil ways. He's a good farmer, and when you're a good farmer, produce in bountiful ways comes. The issue is that the farmer is focused on himself. He has enough to fill his barns, and he's been able to live and exist on filled barns before. And instead of saying, okay, I've got an ample, I can share and give and bless others, he says, let me tear down these barns and build bigger ones, and then I'll sit back and take it easy and eat and be merry. In other words, I'll have a good life. He's focused on him. It's all about him. And that's the issue that Jesus is getting at here. And he's calling us to shift our focus from me, myself, and I, or us, to God. A bit earlier in Luke, Jesus says this in a teaching. He says, if any of you want to be my follower, in Luke 9:23-25, if any of you want to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross daily, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but yourself are lost or destroyed? I mean, he's circling around this very issue. So Jesus, I think, is pushing us to shift our focus, to move from worry to trust. And he does so in a couple of ways in this passage. In verse 31, he says, the familiar, we've grown up hearing it, you hear it regularly. In fact, it's a song that we sing sometimes. Seek first the kingdom of God, and everything will be given to you. He's saying there, make God the heart of your life, the way you live, the way you think, the way you act. Now, what's that mean? How do we do that? It's not just about saying it, because I can say that God's in control of everything, but if I don't live my life like he's in control of everything, I'm not buying it. I'm just saying it. I'm giving lip service to it. So how do we put God first? How do we seek God first? How do we make God at the center of our lives? Well, the first thing we can do is pray. Why worry? Tell it to Jesus. That's what that bumper sticker's saying. That bumper sticker's saying, instead of worrying, pray. If you're worried about your grandkids, pray for them. If you're worried about your finances, pray about them. If you're worried about your health, pray about it. If you're worried about your job, pray about it. If you're worried about the way somebody treats you, pray for that person. Tell it to Jesus. Give it to God. Walk in confidence. So one of the ways that we can seek God and keep God at the center, at the heart of our lives is to pray. And I'm telling you, if you will just do this every time you take on some worry, you find yourself worrying or stewing about something, if you'll just stop and pray, you'll find that as you go throughout your day, you're praying a lot. And every time you take something back, because we do that, right? I'm going to give you God, I'm going to give you this situation. You know my finances. You know my needs. I'm just giving it to you. And the next moment, oh God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I got to do this. I got to get that. And we just take it right back almost instantaneously. And as soon as we realize that we've taken it back, if we'll give it back to Him, if we'll pray, if we'll stop and tell it to Jesus, amazing how that shift in focus will bring about a peace and an ability to trust God to do what He says He's going to do, and that is to provide for us. It won't always be provided in the way we think or in exactly how we want. But you know what? He's faithful and He won't let us down. He's there. So we make God the heart of our lives by praying. We make God the heart and center of our lives by giving. It's there. It's in this passage, but it's not the central piece. But it is a part of it. I learned a long time ago that giving generously to God and to others in God's name helps me trust God. Early on in our marriage, when Sharon and I made the commitment to tithe, to give at least 10% to the ministry of Jesus through the church, we were making nothing. And we had seminary debts. In fact, I had been offered a job out of college that would have paid me more than I got in the first pastorate. And Sharon and I were in a time and a quarter position splitting it. And combined, our income was less than what it would have been in my first job out of college. And that seminary was 3 years further of education. Now, I luckily escaped college with no debt. Sharon didn't. And so, yet we made the commitment to tithe, and we've never looked back. And our relationship with God has grown stronger and stronger because at those moments when we didn't know where the money was going to come from, we trusted God and God provided. It has allowed us to keep focused and to find a joy in seeing God as our provider. So if we're going to keep God at the heart and center of our lives, we pray, we give, and we also need to learn to serve other people. Because when I serve somebody, I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about them. Keeping God at the center of our lives helps us shift our focus when we see other people and their needs. And so sometimes we need to get out of our routines. You know how it is. You get up every morning, you have the same routine, you go about life in the same routine. And when you go about life in the same routine, you quickly don't see the needs of people around you to be served. And so I encourage you to change up your routines. Go a different way, walk, ride a bike, do something differently. Go to a different store than you usually go to. Look around, because when you're in a new environment, you see things differently. You see needs of people that are around you. And so we have to step outside the normal. I don't know how many of you, I am Facebook friends with a number of you. I'm happy to be Facebook friends with all of you. But yesterday at the garden, at the work day, I shared a story. It touched me deeply about this guy who sits in the shadows of the building, often listening to his music. And yesterday at 9 a.m, he was drinking a beer. He had a big Colt 45. And he was just enjoying himself. And I usually say hi to him and I go on. And so it was really startling yesterday when I was leaving early because there was a leak in the irrigation that somebody had told me about at summer lunch, this week. And so I decided I was going to fix it, and I dug down, but I had forgotten to bring my torch that I used to heat the pipes to put the pipes back together. And I needed that. I had dug down. The pipe was broken. Water was gushing up. So I had no choice to fix it. And when I dug down, I broke the pipe in another place. And so I had to, it was a bad scenario. I had to go home and get this, torch. And so as I was leaving to go home and get the torch, he called me over to him. And he kept saying, "You good people, you good people." He couldn't speak our language very well at all. And I can't speak his language very well at all. And I could tell he was wanting to express appreciation for what we were doing in the garden. And so he told me the country that he was from. And happens I traveled in that country in 2008 with my dad. And so I pulled out my phone and I popped up some pictures, and I thought surely, because he wasn't we weren't understanding each other very well. And so I thought surely I was in the capital city, and we stood in front of the palace and had our picture taken. And I thought if I can find that picture, I can communicate to him that I've been in his home country. And so I found that picture and I showed it to him, and it was like, it didn't register because I don't think he's ever seen the Capitol in the palace in the capital city. But he saw people in my pictures that looked like him, and he knew that I had been there. And so I could tell that took our relationship to a deeper level. And so he thanked me, and I chatted, and I said, hasta luego. And I went and got in my truck and went home and got the torch and came back. And he was there, and I waved to him, and I went and fixed it. And then we worked in the garden. And when we were done, I was walking back by, and he said, "Hey, Pastor, come here, come here." And so I walked over to the fence and stood there, and he said, "1 minute." And he went into his house, and he had the door open, and the refrigerator was right there. And he reached into the freezer, and he took out a water bottle. Now, the water bottle wasn't frozen, and it wasn't ice cold. So I'm guessing that between the time when I left the first time and then he had put it in, he had thought he was going to do something to be a blessing, to give, to say thank you. And so he put that water bottle in the freezer, and he came over and gave it to me. And I started to say, I wasn't thirsty. And I started to say to him, "No, I don't need this. No, thank you." And I thought, no, I got to take this. And so I took it and I opened it and I drank some in front of him. And then as the next person, the other person who was there yesterday, when she was coming out to go to her house across the street, he said, "Oh, wait a minute, come here. And he did the same thing. He went and got a water bottle for her. Now, she had 2 containers of the sports drink. What's it called? Gatorade, thank you. One that was almost gone and one that hadn't been opened. And she was carrying them, and he offered her this water. And she would have had an excuse to say no, but fortunately, she decided to take it as well and thanked him for it. And he kept saying, "You good people, you good people, you good people, thank you. Thank you." And he would go like that. And so, it's amazing what happens and what we see when we serve others. And I think he's watched us serve and cultivate this garden. And it obviously touched him to a level that he wanted to give back and say thank you. And so another way that we keep God at the center, besides praying, besides giving, besides serving, is worshiping. Now, I'm not just talking about Sunday morning. Yes, Sunday morning is important. It is important to gather and worship together. But worshiping is more than that. Worshiping is being filled with praise and allowing that praise to express itself. Worshiping is serving, is giving, is praying. It's looking beyond ourselves. It's recognizing the role that God plays in our lives and giving thanks for that role. So to move from worry to trust is a matter of shifting our focus. It's a matter of keeping God first and at the center of our lives. N.T. Wright says the kingdom of God is at its heart about God's sovereignty seeping into the world with love and power, so that human beings, each made in God's image and each one dearly loved, may relax in the knowledge that God is in control. In verse 33, Jesus encourages us, saying, "Sell your possessions and give to those in need." We read that in the context after that little parable, and we think that Jesus is telling us we got to sell everything and give it away, that we can't have possessions. Now, I've heard it spun that way, and I may have understood it that way once upon a time, but I don't understand it that way at all anymore. I don't think Jesus is saying that it's a problem to have things. I think he's saying it's a problem when we don't use the bounty that we have, the blessings that we have to bless others. And I think he's also saying it's a problem when they become gods, when we worship those things, when we can't part with something because we treasure it too much. And yet we're in the context and we're close by someone who has a need, and that very thing would bless them immensely. That gentleman at the garden had a bottle of water. A bottle of water is what, $1? I don't know. It's not much. But it was a lot to him, probably. And for him to give it, it's not a problem for him to have had it. That's what Jesus is saying here. I don't think he's saying that we can't have possessions. I think he's saying make sure they don't have a hold on you and make sure you're willing to use them to be a blessing for others. It's a shift in focus. And when we make that shift in focus, when we move from worry to trust, we don't have to depend on ourselves to provide for ourselves. God will take care of us. You see, Jesus really wants us to move from worry to trust. So in verse 32, he says, "Don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom." I love that. It gives God great happiness, great joy to give us the kingdom. To give us all things. To give us what we need. So shift your focus from self to God. Why worry? Tell it to Jesus. Move from worry to trust. That's all about shifting our focus. Stop looking at me, at my situation, at my problems. And I tell people all the time when they're discouraged and down, they're discouraged and down because all they're doing is looking at the situation that's going on in their lives, and that's all they can see. And they're looking down. And no wonder they're discouraged and down. When you walk around looking down all the time, I mean, it's a good thing to look down so you don't trip. But when you go around looking down and having an Eeyore complex, you can't see anything other than the clouds. But when you look up, when you shift your focus, you find an ability to trust, and you find that God is there in ways that you didn't imagine. In 2007, when we were a small congregation, heck, we're still a small congregation. I think we're doomed to always be a small congregation, and actually doomed is a wrong, we're blessed to be a small congregation because we are a little church with a big heart. But in 2007, we felt the time had come to move out of our rented situation at Salisbury Christian School and to move to a building. And this building came available, and we became aware of it, and we started thinking and praying about how God would move and lead us. And this building was on the market for $425,000 in 2007. We had about 43 people, including kids, that were a part of our congregation then, about like we are now. We've had lots of people come and go and move on and be a part of us for a while. But anyhow, in 2007, the asking price was $425,000. So we offered the church that owned this building $375,000, $50,000 less than the asking. They countered. That's how it works. When you have a real estate transaction, you make an offer and they can counter. Well, they countered. We offered $375,000. They countered at $360,000. Did you get that? $15,000 less than we offered, which our offer was $50,000 less than they were asking. So for $65,000 less than they were asking, they sold us this property. That's God. And I'm telling you this because I don't want us to forget that. It's good for us to remember those points in which we meet God along the way, because when we're struggling, if we recall those, we'll remember that God was faithful in the past, and He'll be faithful in the present, and He'll be faithful in the future. And then in this story in 2007, we put an offer on a contract. We had a contract on this place for $360,000. We had some money saved in a building fund that we used as the down payment. And we decided that we were going to take a one-time offering. And so on Palm Sunday of 2007, we told the congregation, we're buying this building. We want you to give one time as much as you can give. And then we want you to make a commitment to how much you would pay for the mortgage for the next 2 years, over and above your regularly weekly giving. And our little body of 43 people, including kids, on Easter Sunday gave a one-time offering of $125,000 and the commitment for 2 years to pay the mortgage over and above our giving. That's God. That's the way God works when you trust Him. If we had worried about how in the world we, this small congregation, would step into this building, and this building, look around, it looks like it needs a paint job, and hopefully this summer will be the summer it gets a paint job. It needs some work, but it needed a lot more work than it does now. It was in bad shape. We spent $70,000 to remodel this, and that was over and above what we paid them. And when we hit a pipe, actually it was the plumber that hit a water pipe in the back. That was an expensive hole. I can't remember at this time, $15,000 or some ungodly amount that hole cost. And then the ramp and all these things that we did here. And that was all over and above what had already been given. And it was all God. God provides. You see, we have always been a group who seeks God first, and we will always continue to do that. It's good to remember those times because God is always faithful. This spring, when we were rebuilding the beds at the community garden from wood to block, it was a major task, and some students from Salisbury University said they would come along and help, and they did come along and help, but we got into it about the time school was about to end, and we got about 5 sessions in with them, and then I was like, they were needing to go because they were going on for the summer, and I was like, what in the world are we going to do? And then came Kevin. And then came Cedric. And then came Sarah Lee. And they came not once, but they came twice, 3 times, 4. And they continue to come to the garden. And we accomplished the task. I believe God provided the workers to get that task done. Wasn't concerned about it. I didn't worry about it. I just trusted that God would provide, and He did. Last fall, Salisbury Art Space, who we often partner with to bring art to the summer lunch program, their executive director had to step away and step down because of health issues. She has a tumor in her brain. She had it as a younger girl, and it's come back. And it was causing issues enough that she needed to step aside. She had applied for a grant from the Salisbury Rotary Club. I think that's what it's called. It's the Thursday evening Rotary Club, and for $3,000. And she was worried that her inability to manage that would mean that she couldn't get the grant and we couldn't do art at summer lunch. And if we couldn't do art at summer lunch wouldn't be summer lunch because it's huge. The kids love it. And so she got the idea, what if, actually, another lady, Lee, stepped in and got the idea, what if we could talk Rotary into giving that $3,000 to Community of Joy, and Community of Joy would oversee that? We could still provide summer lunch at the garden. And so that's the way they did. You see, when we shift our focus from us, from me, to God, we move from worry to trust, and God provides for our needs. And then when the school board decides to stop feeding on August the 9th, when school doesn't go back till September 4th, you wonder how in the world you're going to provide. And so I put it out there on Facebook, and I told you this part, that a group, the Christian Leadership and Community Foundation, I don't know anything about them. They saw my post. She contacted me. She said, how much money will it take to feed the kids for the 3 weeks? I said, I have no idea. I don't know how many kids we have. That was before we even started summer lunch for the season. I said, it'll take a couple weeks for us to kind of figure out how many kids are coming, because one day it's one number and the next day it's another number. And I said, we won't know. And I said, I'll be back in touch with you later. And she said, okay. Well, the next week she contacted me and said, will $1,500 take care of the need? I said, well, sure. If that's what you want to give, send it. We'll take it. And so I had in my mind that I would go to Old Town Deli and ask them if I can pay them to provide the lunch. And they're in the process of ownership transition. Malones are selling out to Vicente, who has been the manager there, and he's a young guy, and he's moving into fulfilling his dreams. And so I didn't want him to have to donate anything because he's just buying this business, and I know how hard it is to get started. And so I said, I've got money and I want to pay. But when we got talking about specifics, it seemed to be going to cost a little more than I had. And so I was like, okay, Lord, I don't want to stop feeding a week early. I want to feed these kids right up to the 30th, because I believe that's what you want us to do. And so the food service director contacted Maryland Food Bank without my permission, and they were willing to come and bring food and wouldn't cost us a thing. But I already had this $1,500, and then I was tempted to go that way. And then she said, but it'll be the same turkey sandwich every day for 15 days. And I'm like, well, I don't want that. I don't want to give that to the kids. I mean, a turkey sandwich today and then maybe one next week and one the next week might be okay, but 15 of them in a row? No way. I said that's not good. So then I'm back to going to Old Town Deli, and I'm like, okay, Lord, I need this provided. And so on Monday or Tuesday, I'm not sure, I don't remember what day it was, one day this week, Miss Susie says to me, hey, the United Way wants to do a week's worth of lunch. They want to bring it and they want to serve it. I'm like, that's wonderful. I'm going to be on vacation on the 13th to the 19th. Wonder if they'd come that week and serve it. And absolutely they will. So that takes care of it. So now the money that God provided takes care of all 3 weeks. We have enough to get through to the end of summer. And I didn't worry about it. I just prayed. I let God do His thing. Now, God doesn't always work in the way we want Him to. I had no idea how this was going to work out. And I didn't try to tell God how to work it out, because I'm not God. But He worked it out in a way I would have never imagined, in a way that these kids will get fed until school starts. And I'm grateful. You see, when we can make the shift in focus from us to God, we will move from worry to trust. Again and again, if we can shift that focus, we'll see God bless and provide in huge ways. Jesus concludes this passage saying, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. what you focus on will be your treasure. That's what he's saying. So instead of worrying about anything, move from worry to trust by shifting your focus from you to God. And be amazed.